Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Please help yourselves to coffee and brownies. I am really happy to welcome Mia Lehrer here for one of our last talks of a very busy year. Mia Lehrer came to the GSD and graduated in '79 and opened her own firm, Mia Lehrer and Associates, in Los Angeles, and has practiced her entire career in LA, which I find really interesting because she has been able to develop very specific forms of practice that are very rooted in the conditions of the Los Angeles landscape and its metropolitan area. I am a huge fan of Mia. She is, in my mind, the complete landscape architect. And what I mean by somebody who's the complete landscape architect is that she's a fantastic designer. So you look at her built work, and these are designs that are well articulated, legible, ecologically sensitive, but they have a very strong material and spatial presence. This is not just stuff that she puts in these sites. These are very well calibrated expressions of culture. But in addition to that, and I find this really interesting, she says that when she was studying here and was exposed to the work of Olmsted, she realized that he was first and foremost almost an advocate for public landscapes. And she became fascinated by that. And in parallel, as she is developing the work of her firm, working for private clients and institutions, she is also doing great work of advocacy for the LA River, and in fact has been working for the last 2 decades on educating people and making proposals on the LA River. As she talks to communities, and these are all, as you know, contested landscapes, she understood that, in fact, she has a great vocation for this. And she calls, I love her quote when she says that she uses design to open mental gridlocks with people. Okay, so remember this as a lot of you that are here are graduating, and design as something that you can share with people to open mental gridlocks. This is an incredible image, and that she gives in her. This is in her article, in her interview in Metropolis magazine. I don't want to take any more of your time, Mia. Thank you of your time. We would need to hear from you, not from me. Thank you for being here, and also, I have to say, first thing she told me is, why wasn't I invited for Friday? Mia is from El Salvador, so she is also a Latin woman. And it must be because she's been here for such a long time and so grounded and rooted in LA that we often forget. Next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, awesome to be here. Periodically, I've been back, and obviously the place, is wonderful, and I'm in awe of the exhibit outside and the walls that actually did introduce me to landscape architecture. I didn't know what it was. Like many people in the world don't know what it is. And I am salvadoreña. ¿Cuántos latinoamericanos están acá? No, algunos. Okay. I still hold 2 passports. I may not be able to tell somebody in Washington, D.C. that I do that. But I always say that I've spent this much time in Los Angeles because, and in California, and really rooted myself because I was joined by a few million immigrants from all parts of the world, but many Latinos, and I felt that they needed my voice. Also, as a woman with a family, and competing with, well-established firms or, sort of, this was my domain. And I will always say that if it was, Los Angeles hadn't been so screwed up over decades, that there wouldn't have been as much, it wouldn't have been as great a laboratory as it turned out to be. So I do have a small office in Sao Paulo and now a small office in San Francisco. So with that, I'm going to take you on a journey. I'm going to go fast so that I can share with you sort of our process. I am the founder now of 3 nonprofits, and you'll start hearing about one of them that is called ALMA, and that's because we've been working on the North Dakota pipeline sort of in a way that we can continue operating. You'll start seeing articles and interviews with some of the people in our team. It's not assigned to MLA, it's just basically people doing work for the tribe. And working with other firms across the country on that work. So let's see if I can, now, I'm just scrolling, right? Okay. Nope. Yes. So again, I'm just going to share the context of our work and how I operate and how we operate as a team, and I'm sure that we'll be, we are now located in where this little yellow star is decided to bring our passion for infrastructure and rivers to the river, and also was invited by a woman who's sort of curating an area called the Makers District, and invited a number of us women to actually dare to invest, which is having a renewed respect for developers, actually, for the risks they take. And so here we are, a stone's throw away from the Arts District and Union Station in downtown. Here we are too, 6 rail lines away from the river. And you could see sort of what the river river is really meant to do, which is to carry water, which it does when it's raining, but also when water is released from reclamation plants. And our team, a really great team, and we're working hard on many projects, and I will start sharing. Now, I'm just gonna do this. And this is what we get to see. Graffiti is alive and well in many of our cities, but this is a warehouse that used to distribute hookahs, and now there's 40 of us. So we do get accused in the general area of gentrification, but I'll just say that it went from 4 people to 45 people sort of operating the space, many of whom live in Boyle Heights. So it's a great place to work, and we also, sensitive. We also hold a lot of events in our space, and this happens to be a political fundraiser for the last set of elections. We thought we were going to be celebrating that night, but it was a difficult night, but people hung out together on the fire. Advocacy by design, and that's actually, we're in the process of writing our book. I want to, offer sort of just some of the environmental and climatic and infrastructural and political context of California, so we can understand sort of where I come from and how the perspective. Remember, I was in school here when Esri was being born at the school, and we were guinea pigs for Mr. Dangermond, which was great, and for Carl Steinitz along the way. And at the same time, Pete Walker was here doing high design. So making sense out of that is a whole other story, which I've shared at the school. But that's just something to keep in your own minds as students, that, you're influenced by by the faculty, then you create your own voice. But California is amazing. I mean, aside from blue sky, by the way, it's just a place of invention, and it's the sixth, seventh, or eighth economy in the world, depending on who you listen to. And there's so much richness in what goes on. And this is LA. And despite what many people like to think is that there's no downtown, but there's one and then many others, and about 40,000 new residents in the downtown, and one that have come in over the last 10 years. But we also have a real crisis of homelessness, about 40,000 people in the county area, we think of our cities, and you think of many cities as neighborhood, suburbs, and exurbs, not a single vast landscape. That's in what we see here, and we call this is actually a map that we extrapolated that was about ethnic diversity in LA in the 1940s. But it's really, Los Angeles is a city of villages. And, people make their own villages, and they live in this large metropolis, but they, basically experience the city, whether it's for school or work or family, in different ways. This is Los Angeles. I mean, you have this incredibly rich texture and of communities, both flat and with both flat areas, vast flat areas, but also areas with very beautiful views, all of which have been harnessed and developed. On the bottom, you see the Arts District as it's developing, too. And these are, it's just interesting to see, of course, how it compares to New York, Mexico, and Sao Paulo, both in terms of the extent of the land that it takes. And what you see here is the extent of only the city of Los Angeles, not the metropolitan area of Los Angeles, which is actually it's more like 24 million people, including the other 88 cities. And obviously, we all know, this is a slide prepared for people that don't know as much as GST students know, but by 2050, 75% of the world population is going to be living in cities. So hence, I think that Los Angeles is an incredible laboratory. And the light green is, of course, just the city. So the mayor of Los Angeles only controls that area, but has an influence over the other 88 cities. He's the person that in D.C. manages this larger context of the metropolitan area, but he doesn't. I'm getting used to, so these are the 88 cities, and all of them incredibly different. You have Santa Monica, you have West Hollywood, you have Beverly Hills, each of them managing their land uses, managing their transportation, schools, in a very different way, but all having this big brother around and having, so for example, when the Expo line goes through Los Angeles into Santa Monica, it goes through 3 other cities, and it has to get approvals, and there are many of those, like Beverly Hills, that don't want the people from the wrong part of the area or the county to come near to them, of course, as they lost the battle. And we have 5 watersheds that we manage, and many of the agencies, actually, the water agencies and the school district, and the transportation district, the MTA, all do collaborate and manage those systems across all 5 watersheds. And often, it's hard to understand, but the river and all the waterways are subsumed by freeways and encased in concrete, so it's sometimes hard to figure out what's a highway, what's a river, and, just conceptually how to address that. then, we have these giant basins. People don't know. We have a lot of aquifers. We also have a lot of reclamation plants, and we have reservoirs. So what you actually see here is how the sewer lines actually connect to the to the rivers, and how actually we have very clean water going into the rivers. So that's one lesson we can take internationally, is that reclamation plants make a difference early on in development. And so this complicated jurisdictional system also addresses aquifers. We have incredibly deep but very rich aquifers. And fortunately, though, people haven't figured that out, and they're very protected. So, but we know that probably the governor, whenever he declares emergencies, keeps that in mind in terms of how it can be controlled. I don't know why I'm going in. Okay. So Los Angeles used to be a region of centers connected by rail. The red car provided 1,100 miles of service, more than New York's current metro system of 842 miles. And unfortunately, the car came along, and they figured out how to, basically build freeways. They had the Collier-Byrne Act in '47, and then the Federal Highway Act, and there was a lot of money for all this incredible infrastructure. And in it, obviously the red car rail line started getting sort of erased and demolished, and this is what we end up with today. Of course, by 2030, we hope we're going to be at, so we started out with 1,100 miles, and at best, we hope to end up with 600 miles of rail. But we have a very efficient system that is starting to really work and starting to make a very big difference in our lives. Next, I want to talk about the environment and, everybody's perception that because, actually palm trees and cactus do really well in our weather, and we're part of the Mediterranean biome, and hence we share a lot of weather-related, climate-related issues with with the Mediterranean biome that includes, of course, the Mediterranean countries, but Chile, Australia, and South Africa. And we're always sort of addressing these issues of perception and trying to correct the myth of what Los Angeles is and isn't. And if anything, basically the climate change what climate change has done is made us focus on what's the authenticity of and how to search for authenticity in our landscape. So we want, this is the desert, but this is Los Angeles. It's very different. We have the chaparral, we have, sycamores, we have these riverine environments. And of course, we have these iconic landscapes that we have imported, some which don't do a lot for the environment, just in terms of, the benefit. But from a cultural sort of emotional perspective, this is akin to one of my clients said it would be like taking the Eiffel Tower out of Paris if you started removing all the palms because they don't belong. And so obviously there's a movement to address sort of environmental factors as you do new developments and new landscapes across the miles and miles of streets. I always have enjoyed reading every few years Raynham Badham's analysis of Los Angeles. It helps me stay grounded. So, basically the flatlands, the hillsides, the ocean, and the freeways is what he saw. What he didn't, really see, and it was because I watched some of his documentaries was that the sky was really gray at the time. And it was gray because there was incineration in everybody's backyard. They were incinerating garbage all over the LA basin. But like, it's a good news story for all of us as we're trying to sort of reverse environmental ills, is that laws were passed in California, and we do have a very strong sort of ethos, and incineration went away and consolidated in all sorts of sort of dump sites and for garbage and garbage collection, and the blue sky came back 30 years later. I mean, it revealed itself. So at some point, I'll do the fifth ecology of Banham as an article. But and so we are always thinking. And again, some of these slides that you see are slides that I've used to communicate with elected officials, stakeholder groups, community members who are smart and interested and in sort of engaging. So this is where I start talking about how we can't think of single-purpose infrastructure. You can't just sort of harness the waterway. You start thinking about how water, transportation, land use, and the environment work together. And this, I'm sorry to tell you, but this is 360 days in California. So you're all welcome. I know I need at least one Californian here. And it does, you know, when I left the East Coast after having been here for 10 years, it really, it made it clear to me that not only was I a, you know, forever Latina who came from a country where there was this kind of sky, but that it really, the weather and the sky impact your soul and your attitude about life. So, California and the Hollywood sign, that, you know, we look at what the Hollywood sign really looks like. Everybody always thinks when they see it on, you know, that it's this, you know, has incredible gravitas, right? It's like this big sign with, but it's like really was temporarily built and been temporary for, you know, 70 years. And one of the things that we have to, you know, we have really, we like to talk now about 4 seasons: earthquakes, drought, fire, and flood. So we do have to address the issue of the seasons and try dealing with it deeply. Our infrastructure is incredibly fragile, and the urban infrastructure has not been sort of cared for over the decades, and so we have urgent conditions that we're trying to address. More recently, and there was a big gas leak at Porter Ranch, and it was really kind of brought this issue to everybody's attention across the world. And then with the incredible, with climate change and, an unusually rainy winter, which confused everybody about the drought, of course, we actually also had some issues with our dams. And by the way, we in our world, meaning in the environmental world, in the landscape architecture and the planning world, do not think that that the problems are over with the drought, and so we just need to address them head on and continue to operate as though we have to be more responsible with water, period. Okay, wait, oh. So again, we had a sinkhole. I was actually on this road like 3 hours before this happened. And I think everybody is coming to terms with, we still get calls almost every week from a garden club. Can you tell us what this really means? So we send them to the Arboretum so that they can get a class. And so again, look, these are the conditions just last year and now this year with the water. So you can imagine the confusion. Is the drought over? Is the governor going to lift his sanctions? I think all of you know, basically, water is the water we have now is the water we're always going to have. We're not going to have more. So how we use it is the question. And our goal in California is to use salt water the least amount possible, and to try to just use the fresh water that's in California 3 or 4 times. As we, so you use it and reuse it and you reuse it. So most of the water is in the north and the demand's in the south. I mean, that's the basic premise here. And of course, we beg, borrow, and pay for water from not only from Colorado, but from the northern parts of the state. And it's basically a mess. Because we created these sorts of infrastructures, and this is a lake. We didn't sort of do anything to the water. It's basically boron in the water that's been that's so much more denser, or there's more boron for the amount of water that there is than there was when it was a lake that was 5 times the size, 10 times the size. So we have denuded a lake on behalf of the Southern California. And we are dealing, we have really great resources, obviously, with the sun. And, there are those who feel that we're bringing other ills into the desert. There's a tortoise that's at great risk, birds that are learning how to fly amongst these crazy but beautiful sort of wind turbines. So we're addressing these issues, and it's not easy. Let's put it that way. So this is, of course, our young mayor, who I've known since he was a councilman, and he's at the forefront, of course, of all the environmental sort of and water sort of related issues in California. He's a smart guy. And the climate change and the conditions, and you could see California there, and how it's sharing in the sky. This is a slide we did for a national group called the One Water Alliance, to help them understand graphically, simply, instead of 10 engineering slides, one slide that tells the story about where water comes from and how we can work with water and reuse it 10 times over, like I'm trying to say. And then, of course, I describe here the topography of California through the lens of Bantam in terms of the beaches, flatlands, foothills, and valleys. So this has been an interesting process interfacing with these large engineering groups. And, really sort of pushing the agenda that I think all of you here are just taking, as a given, which is going from monoculture to polyculture and multi-purpose infrastructure. So I think what's important to know is that you engage in these practices, and you're not necessarily making an hour for dollar income. So just be prepared that even if you have a for-profit sort of firm, that when you're doing sort of advocacy, you're doing volunteer work, and it has to, I think in the long run, it pays off in many different ways. And one of them is just doing the right thing and advocating for landscape architecture and for the kind of education that we've all gotten here. So, the themes that we talk about is to think holistically and across disciplines, to move from fragile single-purpose systems to multi-purpose systems, towards small decentralized overlapping systems, and that we have to sometimes, and especially in California, but other places too, is to reframe people's perception of beauty, because people are used to azaleas and ficuses and coral trees, which all come from the tropics because they grew when people weren't thinking about how much water they were using. So that we have to stop conquering nature and working with nature, that we have to, keep environmental justice in mind. And how we allocate our resources is really important, that people have to have access to parks and to clean air and clean water everywhere that we live, and that we have to think beyond our lifetime. This is, that we advocate to spark projects. It's funny because on the bottom left you see Mayor Villaraigosa, as an outgoing Mayor Garcetti coming in, and I think they're both going to run for governor. So it's just, that's kind of the life of California. A group of women that have been working together on the left, and this is a small park project we built along the LA River. And then the way we work with, for example, the Green LA Coalition, this group down at the bottom, which is an advocacy group in California. And we're training young people. Writing editorials, they had decided in the Department of Water and Power to take out all the gardens and drought and water-consuming plants and give people funding so they could put gravel down. So we got up and actually did an op-ed piece that had tremendous impact. I made a lot of enemies along the way also. And so now I'm going to share a few projects. And so the river, and yes, you can go, if you know where you're going, you can go on the river. We did the revitalization master plan, two forces that came together, both a grassroots effort, a poet from Berkeley who came down to live in LA and was teaching at the university and created the Friends of the LA River, and then the federal EPA mandate for clean water being delivered to the ocean. So we worked as a team with 3 landscape architecture firms and Tetra Tech, the engineering firm. The watershed is 834 miles. And then, we were dealing with the results of the work of the Army Corps of Engineers. And this is in Virginia, where they actually built what they thought the river would look like, and you'll start seeing it. But basically, the reason they decided to harness the river is because the city was starting to grow. There was rail, there was industry, and there was some major flooding events, and they were, they're there to protect us. So this is a typical condition of the river, then, after a rainstorm. And this is how the river is perceived across the world. And why I always say that maybe we gave a passport to many other cities or countries to actually do whatever you wanted with this infrastructure. And just to use concrete, this was the first time that concrete was being used at this scale, by the way. And just to wake you up a little bit, this was also our governor. So, and that's the model that you just, that sort of confluence of the two creeks. And people in my office used to think that this was crazy I was doing this, but they don't let me cut it off before the explosion. So you're going to wait for the explosion, because it's really important to everybody here. We are actually working on a 12-mile bikeway along this stretch of the river. Don't worry, Anita, they'll survive. He became a governor afterwards, remember? So anyway, and then, what I like to show is all this crap. Oh, good. Okay, I'm glad. So anyway, okay. But, this is also the LA River, and this is Kat Superfisky. She's a Michigander who came to work with us, and we founded a nonprofit called Grown in LA, which actually is starting to grow plant material that is can survive with reclaimed water. So here is that same location again. This is one of the dam areas. There is beauty in a lot of this infrastructure. This is some of the residential, and then the studio areas. This is, what the river. How many of you been to Los Angeles? Have all of you been to the river? Yes? Most of you have been to the river, so I don't have to. To the river or in the river? That's the question. So by the way, the reason why we have plant material here, we did a master plan. We'd like to think that we were responsible, but really, the water table was too high, and concrete never stuck to the bottom of the river in about 7 miles of the river. So, we'd like to take credit, but not really. So here we are. This is actually the 6th Street Bridge, which is getting rebuilt. People who still go fishing and photographing and enjoying the river and as it reaches Long Beach. This is the poet, and he changed himself to those. The protocol for the Army Corps was to actually every year in the summer to cut down all the vegetation, because they were afraid that the city would get flooded if they didn't, because of the coefficients of the vegetation, slowing the water down. Of course, he convinced them only a poet would to take a risk, and they did, and we never had a flood, and this is what it is like in 2007. And the plovers who squawk when you come nearby. Master plans lead to master plans. And after the master plan that we did with Civitas Wenck and Tetra Tech, we went on to produce additional work with the Army Corps of Engineers, which is their next set of protocols, which is the ecosystem restoration study. And amazingly enough, it's incredibly complex, very rich, very thorough study to deepen information, knowledge, and solutions for specific areas so that they can then move forward towards congressional appropriations. And fortunately or unfortunately for us, that funding is, of course, now, it made it to Congress like in the last 6 months. So we don't know what it'll be. But we looked at opportunity areas, and the opportunity areas that we looked at had basically many different criteria, and so everything from affordable living to jobs to tributary confluences to the creation of open space, connectivity, and that led to the studies that the Army Corps did. We, of course, always had in mind not just the waterway, but how open space would start knitting across this system, and how sort of the urban network would come together. And this is kind of how we divided up the work between 3 firms, and it worked really well from a collaborative standpoint. We also had 186 community meetings, so you got to brace yourself. And in each neighborhood, the meetings were sort of adjusted to to react to the community we were dealing with. And in some areas, of course, we were dealing with the studios, and in some areas we were dealing with community, and other areas we were doing with the industry. So this is all available online, and it's a plan that's now 10 years old, and because it's 10 years old, we're actually looking to refresh some of what we did at the time to sort of bring forward some of our solutions. These were the parts of the guidelines that the planning department actually has taken on. So if you are now a developer or a community who wants to have some funding and wants to implement a project like our 12 miles of bikeways in the upper San Fernando Valley, you know some of the parameters. So we do have a river unit both in the mayor's office and in the planning department addressing the hundreds of projects that we propose based on the master plan. We also created a series of guidelines associated with all the edges of the river. So both conditions that were sort of parallel to the river, but also that intersected from the river, through the river. So, this seems like no big deal because you guys know montages really well, but these were the first montages that were used that the Army Corps had ever seen. And it was the first montages that our firms were doing 10 years, 12 years ago. And making them climate appropriate and also culturally appropriate. If you start looking, you realize it's not just sort of what I'm talking about. But also the Army Corps accepted the fluvio-geomorphological conditions of the river. So they were saying, okay, you can do this. You can widen the river, you can plant in the river, and maybe what you will do is have some ways of letting people know that water's coming if there is a big flood event condition. Actually, by coincidence, my building is to the right here. But, I didn't do that at the time knowing that I would be there. And this is a condition where you have an industrial area that's going to hit the river. So, we've made a lot of progress. I have to add 3 more years, I guess, here. Here we are with a group of people who had decided to, in order for the funding to come forward, the river had to be declared navigable. You go to Washington, D.C. with a picture like this and say, this is a river, and they say, yeah, right? You must have had something to drink or smoke yesterday. So there was 2 years of advocacy, not just, really I wasn't leading this, is the city at this point is advocating, and what you see here is a documentarian deciding, I'm going to take my kayak, I'm going to go down the river, and I'm going to prove to them, because there is a low flow channel there. So that water is always running from the reclamation plants, and it's 12 feet wide and 8 feet deep. So you actually can drown. So that's what led to this. This is the former head of the EPA, and Mayor Garcetti at the time just turned mayor. So that was the day that we celebrated that the river was navigable. And this is now, remember, now it's navigable, and now the plants are not being cut back. And even though we have a lot of arundo that we have to get rid of, we have this condition where for 5 months out of the year, people are fighting to get on kayaks. And people are fishing, and they have been fishing, and this guy's gotten pretty old. He is a Salvadorian that I now know. I know his whole family, and he goes there every weekend, comes back to MacArthur Park, and basically barbecues the fish. And it was a pretty big one. Look, and this is one of the confluences, the Arroyo Seco, connecting to the LA River. Some of the projects that we've started the activation on the river. This is the Frog Spot, which is from Friends of the LA River. This is a group of artists who actually did a playing card, 52 playing cards for the 52 miles of the river. And it's important to note that we only studied 32 miles because of governance issues, balkanization. The mayor at the time, Villaraigosa, was probably going to run for governor, and the county supervisors didn't want to give him the ability to go beyond the city line. So we only studied LA. We didn't study the bottom 8 cities. So here you are, which is what the project is on the table right now. And so here you are, the kinds of interventions that make the river sort of manageable, and where people really kind of start getting a sense that this place exists and that it becomes a part of their life. And though right now we have 40,000 homeless that are allowed to live on the streets if they have tents, it's kind of hard to now show, of course, the camping that happens along the river that is actually more for people who could afford to camp. And placemaking plan, this was a HUD project, again, taking a plan to another level of detail, and this is helping people understand how new development can change their neighborhoods, and how we actually can start understanding and influencing the developer world. People who live in the neighborhood. In the center is Helen Young. She's now the co-director of LA Mas, and LA Mas was created by a student here and myself, and she's Elizabeth Timmy, and I created LA Más, Más as in more in Espanol, so more for Los Angeles. And so we've been doing work with this community for a while, helping them understand, again, the potential. And then the Piggy Backyard, totally an advocacy project. We were called to action by Friends of the LA River. You have this big sort of parking for trains that makes no sense because it's really constricted in the middle of the city. What else could it be? And what we decided is that to really, it could be knit back to the city, it could be given back, it could be allow us to work on the fluvial geomorphological aspects, hold water, and start really generating energy in a part of the city that's totally industrial, but also across from Union Station. So this project eventually caught the attention of a nonprofit. He's actually one of my angels. He's funded a number of studios here. And we did some additional environmental and additional economic work to understand, would this project pay off if the land cost $1 billion? The answer was actually yes, and it is being used in the possibility that we will get the Olympics as one of the potential venues for the artists for the athletes' village. Just to say that sometimes this level of advocacy can actually pay off. Doesn't mean we will get the contract, because there's certain big firms that we all know that have a relationship to the GSD who actually usually do all the work for those projects. But we can have the satisfaction of having done work that has a big impact in the city. I don't have to show you all these diagrams. You know what we were trying to do. We're trying to connect, clean, and make a place. And in order to make it more real, we did do a model that seems to help. And we then, beyond that work, we did some additional work in areas where the river touches a couple of institutions across Griffith Park or across across studios. Trying to inspire the studios to take part, because they've taken over the edges of the river, and we've succeeded in kind of taking on these opportunity areas and moving forward. I'm going to go further, but this is, for example, Warner Brothers as it touches Griffith Park, and our notion of inspiring them to think about what it would be like for their community to actually have access to the river and to have perhaps a residential development in that area so you can live, work, and play in the same place. And the same thing for the Verdugo Juncture, where you're actually connecting Glendale and several institutions, including the Autry Museum, to the zoo, and then to Griffith Park again. And models and work. Then this is Union Station. Just to prove that Union Station is actually a happening place. It's actually right next to the river. When we first started the work, the MTA did not want to acknowledge that the river had anything to do with their property because it was 500 feet away. But with some advocacy and sort of convincing, and things started enlivening, we actually got them by the end of the 2-year project, the master plan with Grimshaw and Gruen, the river started appearing, and the MTA bought some property. So they're going to be, and this, this is the forecourt of the river. And then finally, I'm going to show, so Vista Hermosa Park, there's 40,000 new residents in downtown Los Angeles, and one of the things that's really important is to actually address we don't have a master plan for parks in Los Angeles, because there's 15 councilmen who decide where parks are going to go and how money is going to be spent. And there is a needs assessment, but anyway, this project was harnessed out of leftover land from a school. 200 homes had been expropriated, but they didn't calculate how much land they really needed, so they only used half of it. So politicians and the Santa Mountains Conservancy came together to create this park, which is a 10-acre park adjacent and overlooking the city, where, you know, there is soccer and play, and my first experience with 3 gangs operating around a site that I worked on, which I befriended, and they keep the place safe now. This is Ivan, and I tell him that I show this all the time. He's very proud of himself. And we had to also convince him that we couldn't have fancy exercise equipment in this park, because this park was meant to really show the potential of the mountains in the city. And this was the agency, and the bond money they had could not, you know, be for fancy equipment, so we had to create everything. So he found a way of doing exercise. And this is the day that, you know, they opened the park. And just to note that there's Mayor Villaraigosa. He had just taken office about 12 years ago, and he had nothing to do with making this park happen, but he was there to open the park. So, and just so you know that parks make a big difference. You know, using the large scissor to open a new park has a lot of value to community. South LA wetlands. In terms of water and the way we're addressing water in Los Angeles, there was a proposition, Prop O, to do experimental projects throughout LA County. In this one, we took basically what was on the top, a rail car, old rail car, basically maintenance yard, that became a school and then also became a wetland. And what we did was we basically took the stormwater pipe, unleashed it into a wetland, and then put it back into the stormwater system. And the idea was that we're tracking about 50 of these projects to see sort of the overall sort of metrics and impact in terms of the water quality throughout the LA basin. And finally, I'll leave you. If I had had some, you know, if I had done what some of the people say is that you have to have some kind of a business plan to keep going, to keep the door open, to sort of pay your bills. In my life, would I have thought that I'd be doing 3 stadiums? And I did have sort of stomachache about what are stadium. I had never been to a football game, be honest. I did grow up with soccer, and I have been going to baseball because we've been working on Dodger Stadium. But this is an interesting project in so many ways. It's an old racetrack, which was, you know, very much at the heart of the Hollywood community, but also it's in Inglewood, one of the cities within the city. It's basically run by an amazing mayor who is used to be a police chief. And these 300 acres that then became 600 acres were, and we still got to go, by the way, to the racetrack, and it was amazing. You could see it's under the flight path for LAX, and it's an amazing infill project. 4,000 new units in a community that's in desperate need of good news, Inglewood. A lot of gang activity, a lot of poverty, and you know, now what you have is the opportunity of residential, commercial jobs, and the stadium, which working with HKS is going to be a community asset in more ways than one, meaning that the site will be available not only the 30 days of the year that are games, and actually we're getting now 2 teams, so it's 60 days, but that it's going to be available to the community for many other different types of events. In addition, we're also created a series of gardens that are demonstration gardens, but we don't say that in public. It's cheaper to do gardens than to actually do plazas and concrete and walls, which is good. So we could argue for it in more ways than one. We're actually capturing all our water, reusing all our water, doing geothermal energy, creating 25 acres of parks, connecting the place to the rest of the community, and also the entertainment venue, which is the Forum. So here you see this giant new development in what was a racetrack. And by the way, the lake is right where the original lake was for the racetrack. So when I'm saying I'm in California or Southern California, I mean, you can imagine these projects come up, and of course, they're very, knowing what we need to do to really bring parts of the city to life, this becomes really important. And we worked with the community because gentrification is, of course, an issue. So this mayor is incredibly cognizant of the fact. So throughout even our construction project, we're being asked, who's going to be on the site? Are you training some young people from the neighborhood to understand? We have 2 students, high school students from Inglewood High School, going to be with us this summer to just learn what landscape architecture is. And again, this is sort of the idea, the venue had to be 80 feet in the ground because of LAX and FAA regulations. By the way, it's the only project that I'll ever be able to see in construction or oversee construction from the airplane. I always have to be on the right side and of the plane. And there are 200 bulldozers, mega bulldozers working as we speak. The hole is dug, structure's coming up, and we've deployed every kind, in the specific plan we worked on, everything is actually going to get built as designed because of, what a high profile this project is, and because the mayor's really committed. Again, we developed this strategy of dealing with the Mediterranean biome as part of the work that we do in Southern California, because it's too late to go back to just the California landscape. So going and doing these explorations and planting these huge urban forests. And finally, at the Natural History Museum, where we're also working on the Lucas Museum, we finished a project 7 years ago that'll be in some tours during ASLA. Urban ecology, the term urban ecology was not a term that anybody, and certainly Natural History Museum, had really kind of come to terms with. They knew that they preferred to change and open themselves to the world and the exposition line, but we turned parking lots into gardens. And this will be the last project. Performative landscapes, which was, I called my meetings with all the scientists, my ologist meetings, because there were 22 different scientists, and I stopped sort of understanding the nuances of what everybody did. Herpetologists is as far as I went, and then there were 3 levels of herpetologists. So, but they loved the notion of performative landscapes. And so this wall, for example, has no concrete on the foundation and is basically defying gravity because we have cables kind of holding it together. So the day that there is actually a snake going through the stone wall is the day I'll have completely succeeded. I'm not sure everybody else will think so. And this is the end of the river, which is the dry river from the, we have a series of sort of stories we tell, and again, more of the same. So and this is actually a celebration to bees, a pollinator garden, which we finished about 2 years ago at the edge of the site. So I think with that, I want to really kind of leave you with the notion that you can make a difference, and you can create a team that really cares about similar things that you do and has similar values, and that you don't graduate knowing what you want to do exactly. I think that the experience as you move through different projects in a firm or different jobs has tremendous value. I had no choice but creating my own firm because I wasn't treated very nicely after I had babies, but I think that the world has changed since then. So for all of you who are as fathers and as mothers that are starting careers now. I think the world's a bit different, and obviously working remotely or time at home to do work, all those things work out too. But we need you in this world. And one of the saddest things for me is when I see people leaving the profession because they can't figure out how to fit in a conventional practice. My practice is not the kind of practice that you're going to have the cover of Landscape Architecture every other month. I will tell you that. Because a lot of the projects are messy. You know, the budgets are not humongous, but they are incredibly satisfying. They make a difference, and I think we owe it to cities to just contribute in the best way that we can. So with that, I want to open up to questions. Yes.
First of all, thank you. It's beautiful, inspiring. Full disclosure, my name is Paula Di Monte. I'm the Loeb Fellow this year at the GSD, and a lot of the work that you talked about, I direct an initiative called Blue Cities at the Charles River Watershed Association.
At the Charles River? Uh-huh.
So I could relate to a lot of aspects of this work. I do a lot of advocacy in my own career, and I don't come from a landscape design background. However, I see the need that you're fulfilling in your practice. And my question to you is, if we can't afford to have MIAs in every single state or for every single river, what does the future hold in our current political environment for rivers that don't have people who are invested in them because they live those contexts in their everyday lives? And as these professionals who are graduating and looking to adopt rivers in other ways, what would you advise for the Trinities of this country and other rivers that are sort of out there, vulnerable, looking for planning practices to shape them in ways that are beyond the aesthetic and the consumptive quality?
Great question. The Trinity has advocates, I'll say that. But I do, okay, so in the big picture, we try, for example, at ASLA to have every year 4 or 5 people up on the dais talking about the rivers they're working on, so people get inspired. I will say that there are many nonprofits to sort of try to engage with that have sort of national sort of presence, like the Trust for Public Land, who basically has been working hard in several cities, including Atlanta. But what I am concerned about are the smaller rivers that reach the borders. And there are national trails conferences. I mean, you have to look for partnerships or opportunities like, these national trails or national parks conferences, and find people presenting projects that are associated with parks or that are associated with water, and find ways to merge. There is and was out of Berkeley a national or maybe international rivers sort of organization that I haven't tracked for a while. There is room for that. I think that's a challenge that I would pose to you as a Loeb Fellow, to create a convening, but to inspire people in cities who may not know or have not been trained as landscape architects. I think articles in newspapers or sharing of this, these experiences like the poet and others are ways that perhaps we can communicate across boundaries. But that's why I say that landscape architects and planners who come out of these universities hold a responsibility to really sort of engage. So we've been working on a river that sort of ends up in Mexico, a small little river. And, it was from a trails conference. We went and made a presentation. The guy got all excited, and sometimes it's about even cleanups and bridges, and that already does a tremendous amount. But a renewed respect, anything we could do with documentaries. I know the ASLA did one documentary. I'd love to see documentaries about how rivers can be sort of brought back to everyday life. People, a lot of immigrants come from countries across the world that have memories of streams and rivers that they grew up around. And I think we just have to, we have to have a River Day, I guess. I think there is a River Day. So maybe the River Day has to be expanded. Anyway. Anybody? Nobody has a question?
So I had a logistical, boring question, but so how do you staff your nonprofits? How do you fund them? Because we have many students that are very interested in this kind of work. I think what you're saying is that, and that's why I introduced you as a complete landscape architect. You do design and you're very busy with the nonprofit work as well. So how do you combine the two?
Okay. Initially, we depend on internships. Paid internships, but internships. The for-profit funded LA Mas for a year and gave it a home and, and printing and everything else, phones. It makes some people in the firm uneasy, but I say that I pull the president's card, which is, I'm the president. I pull the president's card when I want to, and that's one place that I pull it. The second one is relying on grants. And the person that you saw in the river, only she would go into the river, actually, even though it's clean. But she operates, basically, she has to have 50% billable time. And the other 50% of the time, she has been managing billable, unbillable work. She's been writing grants, and she just got a $45,000 grant from the Nature Conservancy for a really interesting project. So, and that, for a nonprofit could mean 9 months. So, and the third one was nighttime weekends, because it came out of the passion of people in the office. I barely engaged. But they, in November, everybody was so desperate, and they were watching, and this is the month before, actually, they were watching the tribes sort of suffer, and trying to, they realized and made a call wrote to their lawyers, found their lawyers and said, "You guys have maps." And they said, "What are you talking about?" Maps that show where all the waterways that go through the reservation are and how they might get impacted if the pipeline goes in. And they didn't have any. So imagine the power of that, getting the base information and getting all the, sort of information that you could trust was the next piece. But it was all done after hours, weekends. Now we have the public TV station doing a series of pieces, and now they're going to pay that group to do, and through this third nonprofit is going to do a series of studies on the border. The public TV, KPCC just is loving it, and just they want to so they're going to unveil about 10 stories about the pipeline. And then they're going to pay for some additional work. So it's not grants are the best way to go, and the fact is that we, to be honest, we've been a little messy I mean, a little like infantile at times. But Ellie Moss, for example, is starting to get really serious grants, like $150,000 and $200,000 grants. And they have a capacity grant, which is a huge deal to get a grant for capacity building, not for the directors that are there now. They got $150,000. That's huge. And they have a mentor, and they have a, they have really, so, and so we're not housed together anymore, but I'm on the board. So I get to sort of just observe and enjoy and sort of, basically critique with a great group of other people who are on that board. So, there's a young woman who's interning there this summer from Princeton, architecture. So, those opportunities are there, and I think they're there to take advantage of. But it's not, if you're in our office, it's confusing. The Grown in LA is over there, the Alma's everywhere, and then everybody's supposed to be somehow productive at least 1% of the time. But, and there are protocols to get your certification, as a nonprofit. It's not, it's not just easy, and then you have to keep good books or else you're, audited. So, but what I have been advocating for in terms of my groups is that they have to get to a place where they pay themselves at least as healthy, maybe 10% less a salary as if they would be in a conventional firm. And then that's viable. And there are a lot of foundations that are very interested in this work. Acupuncture, all the project, all those urban sort of sparky project that spark sort of urban, renewal or urban energy. There's just a lot there. I have a funny story, which is about insurance, because when Ma started building a lot of furniture, like in the studio with with saws and nails, and then it was all going to go in a public street, and then I woke up in the middle of the night and saying, oh, God, what do we? It's like nobody's going to give us a pass, right? If somebody impales themselves or, I mean, they were beautifully built. They have beautiful craft. It's beautifully built. But, things happen and they get eroded. So we had to develop a strategy for that. So, but I think that in LA, we have quite a few nonprofits building projects. And there's, really a great deal of energy. And I think it's happening across the country. In Detroit, I know in Atlanta, I mean, there's just in San Francisco, these projects are kind of growing through these non-conventional sort of programs.
I guess now I have two questions. But as in response to that, I wonder if you think if that's sort of dangerous for the field, if nonprofits are getting these projects, if that makes it difficult for for-profits. And then the second question that I had was if you ever get any pushback for being too political, whether it's from others in the field or from the city or communities or clients, I don't know, anyone.
Really good questions. Quite honestly, when most of the time the projects that are going to the nonprofits are not the same projects that go for profits. I think it's a little bit of a problem, but I at this point feel that competition is healthy, and that it's given an avenue to some people who don't feel they belong in a conventional practice. And so I have two women went to the GSD in the 1980s and early 90s who left the field because they couldn't find the right, form of practice. For me, it's about how to keep, the guerrilla action going, everybody, whether you're doing conventional or unconventional delivery methods. I've resented it. I have competed at times with certain nonprofits, and then we don't get the work. But the answer to the question is it's hard, but you have to, that's why insurance and all those conventional issues have to come into play also. But you have foundations who are very interested in that kind of work, so capitalize on that opportunity. The other thing is, I would say, more of you should go into the Army Corps of Engineers and to public practice, because we need good people, good clients, and we don't, we rarely get, I'd love to canvass people in the next 5 years who actually applies to a job to a coastal conservancy or to, a state park agency or to the Army Corps of Engineers, though they can be really, we worked on the ecosystem restoration study with a landscape architect who had gone to school at Georgia Tech. She was our client. She was awesome. And she was like 32 years old doing amazing projects. So don't underestimate those opportunities. So just, explore. It's going to be hard to explore in let's say in the federal government, but I think otherwise there's still work. And the other one was, what was it? What was the second?
Did you ever get pushback for being too political?
I push back for being too political. It's interesting to me that some of the younger people in the firm that are, your age, a little older, say, you got to go fight. Like, you got to go fight. Why is Frank Gehry in the LA River? And I look at them and I say, why aren't you guys going to fight? Right? You're here because you like what I do. You're here because what we represent. So it's been interesting for me to watch how that mantle gets taken, and it does, like Alma happened. Yeah, I'm conscious. There are a number of elections that I can weigh in on, but I'm basically usually a part of coalitions. I'm not on my own. So the Green LA Coalition, there's a series, it's a stupid name, but it's really strong. And at a state level, we make a difference with regard to water, with regard to transportation, housing. It's like 50 of us. We've known each other for a long time. Right now, I don't even go to the meetings. 2 other people from the office go to the meetings. We write, we go to Sacramento, we go to DC. It makes a difference. So I just, I'm part of coalitions. It's not like, sometimes I would say most people think I'm a troublemaker. So, but, the mayor will say to somebody, like, I sent a few people to a fundraiser that he was having for a cause of his, and so people went, and the mayor took a picture, a selfie of himself with this young man who went and said, you guys are amazing, you're doing amazing work in LA, and then, they tweeted the picture. And, it's, I think people care that you care, and you're not always, and sometimes I just have to stay quiet for a while when I watch other people take the trouble on. So that's where what I would say is speak your mind, because, otherwise, what's the point? And stay engaged. Make sure, because we would have a very different situation right now. People need to vote. You can't tell people who to vote for, but people need to vote, and we need to care in the next 4 years. And we need to be active, and it's not just, and it's pretty serious, so, yes.
Thank you for your presentation. wondering, it feels like in California, the drought really propelled Southern California across the state to think about One Water, to think about resiliency measures. Similarly, in Miami with flooding, New York with Hurricane Sandy. How much do you think, or how much acceptance is there in these types of measures, whether it's stormwater or renewable energy, these decentralized overlapping systems, thinking about things holistically for climate? Yeah, I just wonder if you could speak about how that's accepted and how much more we have to go in terms of advocating for that work, or is it already there?
Well, you continue advocating, otherwise you get lax. But in California, it's like a done deal, you know. I think where we are right now is our we're carbon trading, and we're so successful that we don't know how to spend the money, that can't figure out what to do, and it's really crazy. So they're trading, then there's a lot of bonds, you know, carbon trading happening internationally with carbon trading from California. It's crazy, I don't understand it exactly. But no, I mean, that's not to say that the homeowners or, you know, the developers, for example, in Irvine, that has been very forward about water. With Green LA, we went to a series of listening sessions, and they said, just charge me more. I don't want to change my landscape. And I mean developers of large tracts of land or institutional developers. I don't care, I'll just pay more. So do you give them that option? Well, we all came out of that meeting just like stunned, because they're at the forefront of gray water, they're at the forefront of all sorts of sort of policies, and they have a great system of purple pipe water for irrigation, and that's what they're saying. We don't want to change what it looks like. We like the verdant sort of Mediterranean, you know, not even Mediterranean, tropical. And that's work that these guys from Green LA are trying to do, is like, do you give people that option to pay like 15% more for water just so they can have what they want? So, tricky, really tricky. But in general, I think we're better off than many parts of the country. But you can't like fall asleep. So we have organizations like Tree People, Heal the Bay, TPL, the National Resources Defense Council. You know, all those are people that are really doing important work, just keeping things alive. And people who, you know, we all need to sort of, you know, support, whether it's with letters or small memberships, so that, you know, things can move forward. I've known, in LA, I've known most of the founders of those organizations, which is really interesting. And they're now at the Institute of the Environment at UCLA. So it's, I think it's a good time, and we can operate independently in California, but it's at the same time a difficult time, because we're not going to get federal transportation dollars like we thought and other things, probably. Hopefully, we're wrong.
You spoke of LA as this laboratory or testing ground. Can you speak of discoveries or failures that you came across in your practice?
As a testing ground. Well, the planting of native plants has been a bit bumpy. Many of the plants that we all like to bring back are not used to the heat island effect. So you end up with, you know, a lot of plants that you thought were going to do well that don't do well, because it's much hotter, there's more smog, and we're using, in many cases, reclaimed water, which has salt content. So that was really hard. So we worked on the Ryan Corporation headquarters with one of the first sort of purple pipe water systems, and we had to go back in and do a major replanting. We had followed the City of Santa Marcos guidelines, and we ended up having to, the trees had to be watered with potable water for 5 years, and it was just a little bit of a mess. So there's a lot of experimentation, and from people in the world in our world across the country, the resurgence of sort of whether it's in the prairies or the Midwest or other places is we have to experiment with plant material significantly to be able to get to a palette that actually survives and works. And of course, we're going to be changing hopefully, the heat island effect by the numbers of trees and so things will improve. But that's one thing that we learned at the Natural History Museum. Fortunately, we didn't take out, for example, we had Corycia speciosa, which is a tree from, not from California, and they're enormous. They're 70 feet tall, and they're laden with tropical parakeets that actually go from Exposition Park, which is in the center of LA, to Malibu every day. So they fly back and forth, which is really bizarre to me because I grew up in El Salvador. That's when you knew it was 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. because they would be going back and forth. But the point is, we just have a new world. We're not going to kill the parakeets. We're not, this is just a new life. And the plant material, that was a good question, but that's something we deal with a lot.
Hey, Mia, thank you so much for your talk. You mentioned during your presentation that LA does not have a unified master plan for parks. And I wonder, with the challenges that are coming forward with water and climate change and political challenges nationwide, do you think that will ever happen, that the councilmen will present a unified front as to how to deal with the city's park infrastructure? And do you think that the river could be a catalyst for that in some way because it unifies the city in so many ways already?
Thank you. And Ellen was a wonderful intern with us last year. I think there's an opportunity for a master plan to come together, largely because we now have 3 funding streams that got passed in the last election. One is for parks, the other is for transportation, and the other is for homelessness. And believe it or not, it's all tied together because many parks are taken over at this point by homeless. So I was at a conference last week, and this conversation was going on. How, on the part of nonprofits, asking electeds or staff from electeds, how are you going to make sure that the funding is properly properly delivering solutions that are more holistic? And I brought up a master plan the whole time, like the whole day, the notion that you don't have to do a plan that's for the whole, obviously this is now 88 cities, but that you can maybe do, sort of district plans so that you can actually see 3 or 5 years ahead, which is where those funding measures are coming. I mean, they had there the woman who leads the Minneapolis park system, and at that conference, and it was amazing. She has, so I was able to, they've done amazing work over the decades, and they've improved the parks, and they, have incredible usage and satisfaction over the park system. And so I was able to ask, do you have a master plan? Of course we have a master plan. So I think it's going to happen in some way, shape, or form, that there's going to be some form of a strategic planning, if nothing else. Maybe they shouldn't call it a master plan, but a strategic planning. But again, it's about communities staying engaged and doing pressure. So what happens is communities that have more advocates or wealthier communities get more parks faster, better, because they're more active.
I think I need this, but thank you, Mia. This was really fascinating. I think it ties really well with Kate's lecture back in February. Another fantastic woman that is both a designer and an advocate and knows everything, the law, the politicians, and the plants. This is fun. For those of you that are here next year, she's going to give an option studio. For those of you that are graduating, sorry, but you can go work for her. And thank you again, Mia. This was great.